Hello. Good morning or good afternoon, everybody. At this time, I don't even know what day of the week it is, but I am so happy to be here with Matthew and Michael. My name is Carla Curiel. I'm the director of Babson Miami. And these are talented entrepreneurs that we're so lucky to have in our ecosystem. I would love for Matthew and Michael to introduce themselves because what they've done is amazing. And I think that they tell always the story very authentically of how they started and where they went. So don't give everything away because I have a lot of questions, but feel free to start with your own intros.
Yeah, thank you, Carla, for having us. Thank you all of you for coming out to listen to us speak. My brother and I are two Miami natives, born and raised here, and grew up in a small farm in the Kendall area. It was funny. We never really cared to be entrepreneurs growing up. We wanted to go work on Wall Street, and then we had the opportunity to go attend Babson, and over there is where we started our first business out of our dorm room. We would eventually go on to drop out of Babson and continue operating the business. And then we were fortunate to actually have sold the business last year, now working on our newest venture, Gail. And like you mentioned, it's been a journey now for almost 10 years, from dorm room, from working in the library of Babson late at night, now doing this whole new journey. And what we're doing today now is it's basically an AI for financial services. And what's really cool about it is it's not only an AI that's trained on the world of financial services, but it talks like a human and it's able to speak 50 plus different languages. And so it's been really great because now we're able to work with a lot of financial institutions across Latin America, the United States, and they're able to use now Gail as a frontline employee to do customer support, sales, and so much more. And one of the neatest things about it has been financial services hasn't always been an industry known to adopt new technologies or lead innovation. And we're seeing that notion change quite a bit now. And so it's been a really fun journey going from startup in our dorm room, now working with big financial institutions across five countries.
You want to add something, Michael? Because no, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say that in terms of what does it actually mean to build AI for financial services? Well, what we found is that the benefits of AI are really obvious. I think everybody here can agree that AI can help businesses be more efficient. AI can help unlock certain capacities that you potentially did not think were possible. Yet, when you look at businesses, whether you're talking about large enterprises, small to medium-sized businesses, generative AI adoption is still relatively low today. And we find that some of the barriers to adoption today tend to be around things like compliance concerns, regulation concerns. Do you actually have the internal knowledge within your company or within your organization to build or use the existing AI solutions today? And so that's where we felt there was a big opportunity. We felt there was a big opportunity to go ahead and build domain-specific AI, so AI for financial services, AI for insurance workflows, banking-specific workflows, lending-specific workflows. And so the platform right now is really divvied up into two products. We have a customer-facing product, which is an AI agent called Gail, and then we have an internal-facing tool. You can think about it like ChatGPT, but for insurance or for banking or actually for your business. So we call that internally Gail GPT. And to give you a sense of scale today we work with about 240 companies across 4 or 5 countries. And we have 4 of the largest insurance agencies in the US using us on a daily basis. We have 3 of the largest banks between North America and Latin America using us on a daily basis. And at this point, I think we're managing upwards of 800,000, 1 million conversations on a daily basis, something extreme like that.
Wow, that's amazing. So I'm going to walk us back a little bit just because I think that one of the most fascinating, I don't know what the word would be, but fascinating aspect of you two is that you're always so grounded. And I like your mindset, your entrepreneurial mindset. Even though you were thinking of Wall Street, right? You ended up at this entrepreneurial school. And something that I noticed in your trip, and in the journey of being an entrepreneur is how you've been able to pivot, right? And so that's a characteristic that is very key to an entrepreneur. So I would love, in case they don't know also your background on how you started, right, with LULA rides, and then LULA, and then ultimately how we end up at Gail, because from each experience, obviously you learn something new. So how did each one build upon each other to have you where we are today?
Yeah, maybe. So I'll go back a couple of years ago. So Matthew and I transferred to Babson. And when Matthew and I transferred to Babson, initially we didn't want to start a company. That was not in my plan. To Matthew's point, I wanted to go work in finance. I wanted to go work on Wall Street and one day end up at a private equity firm or at a hedge fund. That's very much what I wanted to do. When I got to Babson, one of the best things about Babson was that it really unlocked this notion or this realization that you can encounter a problem, you can have a thought as to how you can solve that problem, and then you can actually turn it into something concrete. You can turn it into a product that solves your problem and then potentially solves problems for other people. So when Matthew and I were students at Babson, one day we wanted pizza. We wanted pizza from our favorite pizza shop, Papa John's, and they didn't deliver to campus. And so we thought, wouldn't it be cool if there was an app that let me rent a car from another student? And I shared the idea with Matthew, and he said, let's build it. And so we built the ugliest app you've ever seen, but it was just good enough that it allowed us to rent cars from other students on campus. And what started off as a weekend project in between classes, just being used among our friends, ended up actually becoming a top 100 app on the App Store, ended up becoming the second highest ranked car sharing app in the US. And within a couple of months, we had cars physically available on more than 500 college campuses in all 50 states. And that sounds really great. The big takeaway there, because I'll give you a takeaway for each chapter, the big takeaway there is you can build a great product, but that doesn't necessarily equate to a great business. And we ultimately saw that transpire when the pandemic hit, college campuses shut down, and since we had not built a very stable business, we were actually in a very precarious position. And one of the things, I'm wearing a hat from my favorite podcast, the Founders Podcast. One of the things they always talk about in that podcast is you need to stay around long enough to get lucky. Well, Matthew and I worked on LULA rides for a number of years. And when the pandemic hit and college campuses shut down, instead of saying, hey, we're going to give up, we went ahead and tried to fight just every day, try to make a little bit of progress and stay alive. And we had a really interesting opportunity. The United States military was looking to do the same thing we did on college campuses. They wanted to do on military bases. And this consultant that was working on the project reached out to me and he said, hey, how the hell did you get insurance coverage for 18, 19, 20-year-olds that want to rent cars? And so naively, Matthew and I jumped on a call and we gave them every single bit of information, like every single secret. And at the end of the call, the guy said, well, we don't have anybody internally that can do that. Can you just do it for us? And that is what started LULA. And so LULA was our prior business. LULA was a business it was an insurance platform that allowed businesses to really manage all of their insurance needs from one single platform. So if you were a car rental company or a trucking company and you wanted to go ahead and purchase insurance, you could do it through our platform. If you wanted to go ahead and conduct the background check on one of your drivers or a customer, you can go ahead and use Gail, you can use LULA for that. If you wanted to manage and process claims, you can go ahead and use LULA for that. And so that business over the course of 3.5 years went from nothing to about $50 million in annual revenue. We grew to service over 5,000 businesses on a daily basis. And we were fortunate enough to raise capital from folks like Founders Fund and Coastal Ventures and all of that. And that was a really amazing journey. As Matthew alluded to, that is ultimately what inspires Gail. And so Gail, so that big lesson for us.
So wait, I'm going to stop you right there before we move into Gail. So why did you decide to sell, right? We have to know that's another point as an entrepreneur, right? When it's a good time to exit a business. So what was attractive at that point? Obviously you had, over $50 million in revenue. So, and how did you go about it? Did somebody come to you or were you looking to sell and start something else? So
yeah, well, the short answer, we struck a bad deal with a partner. It put us in a very difficult position. And Matthew and I, we had the opportunity to take some essentially go ahead and sell the core business and continue on with Gail. So that's ultimately how it came up. It wasn't something that Matthew and I were looking to do. It was something that just happened out of circumstance.
And I would say like one of the things that had happened was we got backed by a group that were one of the early investors in groups like OpenAI. And so we had been able to get a sense as to what those groups were doing early on before the rest of the world did. And I'll never forget, we went to an event and they had some of the co-founders there speaking, and they were talking about how great this particular AI was. They had just passed an AP bio exam and scored a 5. And I remember 2 days before, I had been trying to take my continued education course for my insurance licenses. And it was 110 questions. And I was like, you know what? I'm bored. I don't want to do this anymore. Let me see if this thing can help me answer some questions. I ran 30 questions through it and I got everything wrong. And so 2 days later, when we were at this AI event, seeing one of the incumbents show off their tech, I was like, they're talking about how smart this whole thing is, but it couldn't even answer basic insurance questions. And that was where we had the aha moment. We were like, somebody's going to bring AI to the world of financial services or insurance or banking. Why not us? And so when the situation arose with LULA and the whole vendor and all of that, Michael and I were like, wait, there's an opportunity here to sell that component of the business and then just go in on being the people that are responsible for bringing AI to the world of insurance. And I always thought that was a monumental opportunity. Michael and I both read quite a bit. And I remember when I would read the books about Jobs and Gates with the personal computer era, Larry Ellison with the relational databases, Bezos with the internet, I would sometimes get a little bit jealous because I was like, man, if I had been around during that period of time, I would have been the young kid tinkering with that technology and would have built something incredible. And so when we saw this opportunity, to me, it was almost a no-brainer to kind of go all in. And I do think we're in a position now where we can be the company that brings AI not just to insurance, but the world of financial services. And that alone was something that got me super excited and made us all want to go all in.
So with basically the problem that you're solving with Gail is just the ignorance of the AI for that industry.
Yeah, I mean, you can put it like that. If you think about how the traditional incumbents were built, they were built for very generic use cases. Hey, help me write my history paper. Hey, I want to get this particular information really quick. And so they work really, really great for the general world. But when you think about something as nuanced, as regulated, as complicated as financial services as a whole, those generically built AIs don't necessarily work for that. You have to architect the data privacy in a particular way to make sure the bank and their procurement teams feel safe. You have to make sure that the AI is trained so that it could answer these complex insurance questions in a very intellectual way. The thing that I always pose to people is, would you trust a generic AI answering questions on your chemo coverage? Probably not. You would probably want an AI that's been trained specifically for the world of insurance, and that's kind of the problem that we're solving. Is we're bringing specially trained and specially built AI for these industries.
Yeah, I've personally noticed, I don't know if everybody does, that most of the AIs out there just want to please you. And they will even make up answers just for you to be right. And then when you challenge them, they're like, oh, you're right about this. So it's definitely important, the job that you guys are doing. And let's talk about building in Miami, right? You're born and raised in Miami. You guys went to high school here, did Miami-Dade, then transferred to Babson. Now doing a few different startups. You've been in the scene for a while. How do you feel today about the startups, the ecosystem? How can it get better? What do we need? If we can talk a little bit about that, the difference between LULA and what you're experiencing today with Gail.
Yeah, well, I think if you're building today, certainly I think building today is much better than certainly where it was 5 years ago or 7 years ago, especially if you're trying to go ahead and build a technology company. And then there's other things as well. One of the things that often surprises people is I had never really understood or really grasped the concept of programming and applications and all of that stuff for the first, call it 17 years of my life. It really wasn't until I was 18, 19 years old that I went to Boston, which is very tech-friendly and tech-forward ecosystem, that I really started to learn about those concepts. And I think now call it 10 years later, you go ahead and look at what some of the schools are doing. Students are being exposed to this type of technology much earlier on. And I would say that is one of the things that I think really will propel Miami forward. I had a conversation with someone recently, and they said to me, what's the difference between Miami and San Francisco? And I said something that surprised them. I said, there's a lot of differences, but one of the primary differences is that San Francisco tends to be more ambitious. And they said, what? Miami's ambitious. Everybody talks about money and stuff like that. And I'm like, yeah, but I'm defining ambition as something different. In Miami, people talk about cars, they talk about luxuries, and that's what they want to go ahead and aspire to. In Silicon Valley, they're thinking about how do we replicate biological neurons and make artificial neural networks, i.e. AI? How do we get rockets to the moon? And I think a lot of that is a function of exposure. So I do see that the Miami community has certainly been more exposed over the last couple of years to that type of ambition and those types of technologies. And I do think that we need to go ahead and index more there. And in terms of building, I know that Miami felt like it had its moment in 2021 and 2022. People are typically going to go ahead and follow where the capital is. There was a lot of capital here. Now it often seems like the capital left. One thing that people don't realize is, number one, there's a lot of growth equity here. So firms like Cotu, D1, Tiger, they all have exposure in Miami. They have folks on the ground here in Miami. Coastal Ventures has exposure here. Founders Fund has exposure here. And one thing that surprised me recently is that 4 of the top 10 or 4 of the top 11 seed investors on the Midas list actually reside in Miami. So Miami certainly is having, I don't think it was a moment. I think that certainly it's moving in the right direction. What I do wish, though, if I had a big knock, I do wish that we did a better job, especially at the university level, educating folks. I'll give you an example. Matthew, not recently, but a while back, went ahead and spoke at a CS, a computer science program at University of Miami. He went ahead and he brought up the concept of, or just spoke about React, a programming language. Everybody's face was kind of confused. Matthew just went ahead and asked, wait, does anybody know what React is? Nobody in the classroom knew what React was.
Yeah, and kind of sorry to interrupt, but and when I asked the professor, one of the things they told me was super glaring. They're like, the purpose of colleges and universities, for the most part, is to get jobs for our students. And so, if we know that UKG, or if we know that one of the or ADP or one of the big incumbents are hiring for a particular framework, that's what we're going to teach all of our students. And because the startup hub at that time wasn't as mature, this is probably 3 or 4 years back, they weren't necessarily teaching it. Whereas you go to Boston, you go to Stanford, you go to all of those, they're teaching different languages and frameworks, even if there's not an incumbent that has 20 engineers guaranteed for that, because they're just preparing them to be able to build really cool stuff. And I thought that was like one of the most glaring differences was a lot of times these universities, and I understand why they're doing it, are just training you to get that next job. They're not training you to actually think much more beyond that. And I think that's one of the big issues from a structural perspective in our school systems here is problematic.
Yeah, I hear you. We've talked about it. There's the thinking big part. And then we were also having the conversation of how it takes everybody in the ecosystem, all the different stakeholders, and we need government involved, support for regulations that support the entrepreneurs. We need the educational institutions to be able to help with the raw talent, and Babson is looking to do our part, but we'd certainly need a lot of universities with the engineering background, programming so that we need to build. Then we need BC to make sure that there's enough funding so that they can grow the businesses. But also, it's a risk, right? When you start up or when you work at a startup, if that startup fails, you want to make sure that you can get a job. So we need a lot of corporations to be here in Miami, to come here, so that you know that if you do relocate and come to Miami, move your family, then you can, and if it doesn't work out for that business, you can get a job while you maybe jump on the other startup and yeah, so it takes the whole ecosystem, and we're here to stay, definitely. Babson is committed to Miami, and I know you guys are committed to Miami. And we were talking about your team, right? How many are you? What's the percentage of your team is based here? And are you using any, because Miami is so central, right? Particularly with Latin America, are you looking into nearshoring? Do you work with countries in Latin America also to help develop and maybe fill your talent gap, if you have any?
Yeah, we have offices. We have two offices. We have an office in Miami. We have an office in Palo Alto. But most of far majority of the folks are actually in Miami. We have an engineer in Costa Rica. We have an engineer in Mexico. But for the most part, the company is in the United States. And we joke around. We say we're SF or SF, so South Florida or San Francisco. Matthew and I are pretty much. Miami is home for us, but we do make it out there quite a bit. And in terms of what we're trying to do from a hiring perspective, we are committed to Miami. So we do want to go ahead and build here. We are committed. One thing that I've started to do recently is I've actually started to reach out to engineering programs at FIU, at the University of Miami, even at the University of Florida. And I've said, hey, I want to go ahead and meet your sharpest, your brightest, your most inspired and motivated students. Let me get some one-on-one time with them and see if we can actually start recruiting some of these younger folks to Miami. I think that one thing that's interesting is if you go ahead and you look at the Manhattan Project back in the 1940s, they were recruiting a ton of folks from the southeastern part of the US. We do have a lineage of great talent in the southeastern part of the US. And I think the last couple of decades, it's been siphoned off to San Francisco and Seattle. And I'm kind of sick of that. So I want to go ahead and play our role of if you were born in the Southeast, great. I want you to be able to find a company that you feel like you can stay at, i.e. what we're doing now. Or if you're not from here, we'd still love to have you, but ideally come and move.
I would just add one quick thing. Like I was talking with some engineers the other day, and they made a really good point to me. I was saying, oh yeah, you can build great technology companies and all this different stuff. And they made a great point. They're like, name me one company that was born and raised in Miami. Name me one technology startup that was born and raised in Miami that grew to be upwards of $1 billion. They're like, San Francisco has more trillion-dollar companies than Miami has billion-dollar startups that have come out of it. And they're like, it's going to be hard to convince us and all the other engineers to come out there until you show it's possible that you can build a multi-billion or multi-trillion-dollar start technology company in Miami from scratch. And so that's one of the reasons why Michael and I, too, are so committed. Now that we've had the last almost decade of experience, I think this is the business that goes all the way. And we really want to be that company that sprouts the seeds here in Miami and lets the world know, hey, you can build an incredible technology from scratch, from here, with a local talent pool, with the local founders and all of that.
That's great. So last few words. I mean, where is Gail going? I know you have some rebranding in the plans. What does the future look like for the Everything workforce?
Yeah, so we haven't been so abrupt about announcing Gail. We've been doing a very bad job of being in stealth mode, but we will be announcing Gail, I say publicly, in Q2 of this year. So that's what you're referencing the rebrand. So if you go on our website and stuff like that, it's still rather vague exactly what we do. But in terms of what the vision for us is, I think we always talk about internally, we always say, wouldn't it be awesome if in 20 years, 30 years, your grandkids are interacting with their bank or your grandkids are interacting with their insurance company and they have this really amazing, this 10 out of 10 experience that we can't even imagine today. And they could be like, yeah, my grandpa built that or my grandma built that. And so for us, what we think about is if we can play a role in bringing the most important, arguably the most important technology the world has ever seen, or if we can play a role in bringing this technology to insurance, to banking, that'll be something really, really cool that we would love to participate in. In terms of what you're referencing to the Everything workforce, we very much want to go ahead and start off on the agent side of things, support, sales, some underwriting side of things. But we think it's really cool to imagine Gail ultimately where a team of 5 people can do the work of 20. A team of 50 people can do the work of 500. And really using Gail as a tool to go ahead and help people do more with less.
You want to add anything, Mateo?
No, he basically took it out. Yeah, the thing that we always think about with something like Gail is it's going to have its own career trajectory, which sounds funny to say because it's an AI, but today it started off as a customer support rep and a sales rep that could answer phone calls or make phone calls. And then now as Gail got smarter and more knowledgeable on your business and your industry, you're starting to see a next iteration where it can act internally as a data analyst, as a finance analyst, as a marketing associate. And then as time goes on and it starts to get more knowledgeable, not just on your industry and your business, but on the world as a whole, that's where our long-term vision of the everything workforce comes from. Like, okay, it's got really good in this particular industry, but if we really want to have Gail, if we want Gail to have its own career trajectory, at some point in the next 10, 20 years, we have to envision a world where it's completing all these different jobs, like data analysts outside of the world of financial services. And so I think that's where we're headed. I think my long-term goal, and it's like my moonshot goal, is I think at some point Elon is going to get people on Mars, and they're going to need banks and insurance companies out there. And so I would love to be the company that built the AI that powers fully autonomous banks and insurance companies in like 100 years. And so like that's my long-term vision.
I love it. You see, think of like, this is how we have to think that big, right? So I want to just give a shout out to both of you. You're an amazing example of, Miami talent, Babson talent. Again, I'm always humble being next to you because you are so humble and just so focused on really making an impact in our communities, social and economic, right? It's not the car, it's not the luxuries, but we want to make an impact on those communities. So you take the Babson flag high. And I actually heard this from a VC that said, you know what? I love when Babson entrepreneurs come around in Miami because those are from the best ideas. And I'm pretty sure that has to do with both of you. So thank you for your time and sharing your stories with everybody.
Yeah, thank you.